Hey guys, it's me. I just wanted to do a quick video for the chapter 6 review in case any of you wanted any clarification, also to point out some of the things that have come up on recent FRQs. So I'll try to be quick. So hopefully you have this as a reference. It doesn't look like a lot of people are actually watching these, so I kind of feel like I'm wasting my time. But for those of you who are, thank you. And I'll keep doing them because I know that they may help some of you. So chapter 6 is the learning chapter. So this is where we're focused on that behavioral approach. So when we talk about the behaviorist, remember it's important to know that the behavioral approach in psychology was one that was very objective, meaning they thought everything should be scientific. We should be able to observe it. Therefore, they thought that there should be no reference to mental processes or cognitive processes whatsoever. So everything should be observable. Okay, just getting that out there, moving forward. It's where we talk about John B. Watson with little Albert and the experiment where he classically conditioned the infant to fear the white rat. Also get into Pavlov and Skinner and some of those important names you need to know. So starting with classical conditioning and Ivan Pavlov. So make sure that you understand the difference between classical and operant conditioning. Both types of associative learning, but with classical, remember, it's learning to associate two events that you do not control. The dog does not control the ringing of the bell and the salivating. That is an automatic response to a stimulus. Okay. Whereas operant conditioning is learning the association between your actions and the resulting consequence. So, most important things when we talk about classical conditioning are making sure that you know the difference between a conditioned and unconditioned stimulus and response. If it is conditioned, it means it has been learned. Unconditioned means it would happen naturally. So, looking at Pavlov, it is unconditioned that the dog would salivate with food in its mouth. Therefore, food is the unconditioned stimulus because it would naturally and automatically cause a response, which would be salivation, the unconditioned response. The dog has to learn to salivate to the sound of a tone. So therefore, the bell or the tone is your conditioned stimulus. So your conditioned, response can only be salivating to the sound of the bell. So just make sure, because that is the one that has come up on AP exams recently on free response questions, is conditioned response. Making sure that you know a conditioned response has to follow the conditioned stimulus. Okay, makes pretty good sense, but I put a picture there in the handout for you, so hopefully you'll be good. Always refer back to Pavlov if you have any confusion with classical conditioning. Moving on, the chart that you have in there with terms like extinction and spontaneous recovery, generalization, discrimination, those terms will be important. Make sure you know that generalization, discrimination, they're basically opposites. If an organism has generalized, it means they are responding to a stimulus similar to the conditioned stimulus. If they are discriminating, it means that they're able to tell the difference between that conditioned stimulus and some other irrelevant stimulus. Okay, so a couple of examples I gave you in class of generalizing would be if you are afraid of, dogs because you were bit by a dog when you were a child. That dog caused fear, but now you generalize that to all dogs and you fear all of them. Whereas maybe you got bit by a large dog as a child, and now you only are fearful when you see large dogs, but not small ones. That would be discrimination. So that can apply in both of those scenarios. With spontaneous recovery and extinction, remember, extinction occurs when we stop pairing that unconditioned stimulus with the conditioned stimulus, meaning when the food stops following the bell. If you continue ringing that bell and you don't give the dog food, eventually that salivation is going to become extinct. That is extinction. But remember, spontaneous recovery tells us it doesn't actually completely erase the learning, but it just suppresses it, because we have found after waiting a period of time and then presenting that conditioned stimulus again, the dog will react. You ring the bell after a couple of hours, the dog salivates. That is called spontaneous recovery. That chart is there for you. Looks like most of you got that filled out okay. So just some terms to make sure that you look back over and are familiar with. Operant conditioning. There's a lot more focus in recent FRQs on operant conditioning. Operant means we are learning to associate our behavior with the resulting consequences. And so when we talk about operant conditioning, we're talking about reinforcement and punishment. Most of our focus will be on reinforcement. Remember, reinforcement is anything that strengthens the behavior it follows. If the behavior gets stronger, it has been reinforced. So that takes me to our positive and negative reinforcers. Really, really important here that we remember negative reinforcement is not punishment. All that the positive and negative means is we're adding or we're removing something. Positive reinforcers mean after a behavior occurs, we are adding some type of a desirable stimulus, like giving your dog a treat after they sit, or giving you a good grade on a test after you've studied hard, or giving a kid a star after they, I don't know what elementary kids do, but giving them stars on a chart, that's some type of positive reinforcement because we are adding something. Negative reinforcement means we're removing something that's aversive or undesirable. So after the behavior, we remove something that you don't like to do. For example, if you get good grades, your parents don't make you do chores for a month. That's negative reinforcement. They are strengthening your behavior by removing something that you do not enjoy. Okay? So make sure that you understand the difference. And if you don't, when we talk on Sunday, make sure that you ask. Also, secondary reinforcers have come up. So when we talk about what reinforces our behavior, primary reinforcers are anything that naturally would reinforce us. And those are things that are biological needs, like food, water. But we have become reinforced by many, many secondary reinforcers because they are associated with primary reinforcers. So your number one secondary reinforcer is money. Money is a reinforcer because money is how we get those primary reinforcers or those basic needs. Okay, so anything like grades, money, things that we learn to be reinforced by, gold star, those are going to be secondary or conditioned reinforcers, they're sometimes called. So keep that in mind. That just means that they're learned. Then looking at the schedules of reinforcement, I want to make sure that we remember if you see that it is fixed, that means it is on a set schedule. If it says it's variable, that means that it changes. So when we're talking about the behavior, that behavior is either fixed, if we're talking about a ratio schedule, or the time is fixed, or it's variable, meaning the number of behaviors may change or the amount of time that has to pass may change. Now that brings me to the second part. Is it ratio or interval? If it is a ratio schedule, that means that a behavior must occur in order to get reinforcement. For example, a fixed ratio schedule would mean you have to perform a certain number of behaviors before reinforcement. Speedy reward card. We have to buy 7 drinks before we get 1 free. That is a fixed schedule. We know how many behaviors have to occur. It stays the same in order to get reinforcement, but we must perform that behavior. Same thing if it's fixed, if it's variable interval, like buying a lottery ticket. You have to purchase the lottery ticket. It's ratio because the behavior has to occur, but it's it's variable, not interval. It's variable because we don't know how many of those lottery tickets we have to buy before we might win. Same thing with gambling, playing a slot machine. How many quarters do I have to put in this machine? How many times do I have to play it before I might win the money? It's variable, but it's still ratio because it requires a behavior. Interval schedules just means time has to pass. So if it's a fixed interval schedule, it means it's the same time. Okay. So for example, you're baking cookies and they take 30 minutes to bake. It's a set amount of time, it's fixed, but you just have to wait for that 30 minutes to pass. There's nothing you can do to make those cookies bake any faster. Same thing if you watch a TV show every week. It's on at the same time every week, but you have to wait for time to pass before your favorite TV show comes on. Now, when we talk variable interval, now we're talking about things where we're not sure how much time may pass before reinforcement, like waiting for someone to respond to a text message or an email. Okay. Punishment, simply the opposite of reinforcement. This is anything that weakens the behavior that it follows. So when we have a punisher, when it's positive, we are adding something that is aversive or undesirable to decrease behavior. Punishment would be like spanking. Punishment would be things like your parents making you take out the trash for a month because you were late for curfew, or your parents making you, mow the grass, something like that. Maybe a positive punishment because something is being added after a behavior. So negative punishment, removing something that is desirable, something you like. So this is probably more so what your parents may use, not that any of you ever get in trouble, but they remove something you like your cell phone, your car. So you come home late from curfew, they take away your car or they take away your cell phone. That's the difference between positive and negative punishment. Again, negative reinforcement is not punishment. Please do not forget that. All right, next page. The biological and cognitive stuff, you guys can look over. I put the chart in there for you. I will say that the cognitive stuff in operant conditioning is important, and that takes us to cognitive maps and latent learning. Remember what latent learning is learning that has occurred, but we don't demonstrate that learning until there's reinforcement to do so. So it didn't require reinforcement for us to learn, how to get from point A to point B, for example, but you get your driver's license and now you demonstrate that learning that you in fact do know how to drive from your house to school or to the store or to your friend's house. You learned it, you just never had to demonstrate it until there was an incentive or reinforcement to do so. Okay, a cognitive map is just that, we have this mental representation of our surroundings. Okay, this is all cognitive influences in operant conditioning. Same thing with intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Doing things because we want to. Intrinsic motivation just means I'm doing something for the sheer joy of it because I actually enjoy doing it. Okay. Looking at the learning and personal control stuff, just know learned helplessness is Martin Seligman. You remember what learned helplessness is, that, people develop this sense of, helplessness, but that they can't escape a bad situation. So after they are subjected to so much aversive stimuli, they just give up and kind of become a victim to it. We talked about Seligman and the dog that was repeatedly being exposed to electric shock. And when he finally was taken out of the restraints and they continued to shock him and he could have run, but he just sat there and continued to take it. He had developed learned helplessness. Your internal, external locus of control, I think we understand those. I do believe they have been on recent FRQs. Just that belief of, do you control the outcome of things that happen to you or not? So that internal locus of control is I have control over my own fate, versus an external, which external is what causes people to develop that learned helplessness where no matter what I do, I can't escape my situation. It's out of my hands. That's that external locus of control. So that whole sense of control really affects things like self-esteem, self-efficacy, feeling as though you are competent, etc. Okay, last thing is observational learning. Make sure that you know what it is. It's not hard. We observe. And then we imitate, and that's called modeling. And the term modeling has come up on the AP exam multiple times. Actually, that's come up more than once. So make sure that you know modeling is just imitating, we observe, and then we imitate behavior. And please be able to reference Albert Bandura and the Bobo doll experiment. Okay, I think that we will all remember that. The pictures are there in your handout, but the children watching the adult woman beat up this blow up doll and then imitating or modeling that behavior afterward. That would have been an example of antisocial behavior because those children are demonstrating, aggressive, hostile behavior. The mirror neurons in the brain, remember, those are those neurons that are active when we are watching others perform other actions. Why sometimes people yawn, we yawn, they smile, we smile. Those are neurons there in that prefrontal cortex right here in the front of our brain that are active when we are observing another person's actions. So that they play a role biologically. That's what plays a role in observational learning. Let me just look and make sure I've pretty much hit on everything. Again, on the AP exam, schedules of reinforcement have come up. So please make sure you know the difference between fixed and variable, ratio and interval. Make sure you also can explain the difference between positive and negative reinforcement, which has come up. Positive reinforcement has come up more often than negative, but both to make sure you're familiar with. And then with Pavlov and conditioned versus unconditioned stimulus and response. And then reinforcement, just reinforcement in general. Know your secondary or conditioned reinforcers, primary reinforcers, continuous versus intermittent, which is your schedules of reinforcement. That's it for the learning chapter 6. I say that's it as if it's not a lot, but please ask questions if you have them. We are getting so close. We are just about 10 days out from taking the exam. I guess 11 technically if you count today. But I am here and more than happy to help and review and answer questions. So please reach out if you need anything from me. Otherwise, I will send an invite for a meeting on Sunday. And I'm going to probably try to do things a little bit later on Sunday because it's Mother's Day. I hope that's okay with everyone if we could maybe talk around like 8 o'clock, because I would like to go spend some time with my family, which is a half an hour north, and I'm sure most of you will be spending time with your families as well. So let's try for a little bit later. We'll do like an 8:30. It's not like you guys go to bed early. And please try to hop on and ask questions or like I said, just say hi. Love to see your faces. So, all right, guys, we'll talk soon. Bye.